I could not decide on a topic for today's episode, so I figured some general paranormal stories would be fun. Basically anything unexplained and beyond ordinary. Enjoy these allegedly true and scary stories, and be sure to send me your stories so I can narrate them. I'm still looking for scary stories from the Great Lakes. Also, feel free to suggest some topics below. I'd like to cover more topics I haven't done or haven't done in a while. Thank you. Before we start, consider signing up for EerieCast Plus at eriecast.com/plus. For about $3, you can support this show and our other shows and unlock ad-free access to EerieCast podcasts on your favorite podcasting app. Now, let's begin. Creature in the Springs from Dead Wisp 99. I live in Central Florida, specifically Crystal Springs in Pasco County. Around here there isn't much to do, other than roam the dirt roads and backwoods. But there is a river that everyone goes to for either swimming, fishing, or to get together and party, called Crystal Springs River. The most well-known spot there is called the Rope Swing, obviously due to the old rope everyone uses to play in the river. In order to get there, you have to go down beside the bridge and walk half a mile along the river through mud, trees, and sidestep the occasional water moccasin. Along the way, there are landmarks to identify how far away from the rope swing you are, such as fishing spots, which are close to the bridge in front, the washout, which is about halfway, and finally the rope swing itself. The entire walk, you're surrounded by thick woods. I've had only one other bad experience at the river that involved damaging the depth perception in my right eye, but that's not really important for this story. My encounter takes place at said river. It was me, my friend who's like a brother to me, his older brother, and another friend. Let's refer to them as T, M, and C respectfully. That day we were all bored to death and didn't have anything to do, so T said we should go to the rope swing to hang out and smoke and do some fishing. That sounded better than nothing to us, so we gathered up our poles, tackle box, and bud. T also brought some firearms. As we got there and began unloading everything for our hour-and-a-half trek through the mud, I checked the time on my phone. I checked beforehand because the signal sucks deeper in the woods. The time read somewhere around 6 p.m., if I recall correctly. We walked the path around the concrete barrier and past the two fishing spots where everyone else usually fished at. We always went to the rope swing because we hated people walking up on us while we were smoking. As we got closer to the washout, we started feeling like we were being watched. M actually spoke up and said, "Y'all feel that too, right?" We looked at each other and agreed that we did, but T, being the leader of our group, said, "Dang man, you're paranoid. We haven't even smoked yet. It's probably just a hog. You're not scared of Miss Piggy, are you?" We knew hogs were all over these woods. That's why we brought the firepower. So we just agreed and kept walking, and after about 20 minutes or so, the feeling went away. As we made it to about 15 feet past the washout, I was talking to him about wanting to build a hardcore base in the ruined castle on the Ragnarok map in Ark, and before I could finish my sentence, we all smelled something horrible, like mildew and wet mold. We scanned our surroundings, trying to pinpoint the source. Then C shouted, "What is that?" He pointed up the trail, and we looked the way he was pointing. And up that trail, about 10 feet away from us, we saw this, well, it was some creature crawling out of the woods going across the trail towards the river. This creature was terrifying. Its skin was a horrific shade of gray. Its legs were long and angled in awkward ways. Its arms were human in shape, but they were too long, too skinny, and at the ends, it had claw-like fingers. As I looked closer at the claws, they were covered in a red-colored liquid, which I assumed later was blood. I could not see its face, because by the time we saw it, its head was hidden behind one of the trees next to the river. All four of us watched in shock as it got to the river's edge and began to squat low to the ground, kind of like a bullfrog. Then, in an instant, it sprung up and leapt across the river. Keep in mind, this part of the river is about 16 feet across. The thing was able to clear that in one jump, landing safely on the other side. Suddenly, I was shaken out of my horrified state by T firing his .38 revolver at this thing, followed by M unloading the .22 at it. The thing stood there facing away from us, until T and M had fired all their rounds. After the last round, the thing slowly stood all the way up, reaching nearly 7 feet tall. That's when it turned to face us. We finally saw its face, and I'll never forget it. It had a flat-looking face with 2 giant grayish-white eyes. It had no nose, but rather 2 slits where the nose should be. Its mouth is what scared the living heck out of me. It had huge razor-sharp teeth that were stained red, and 2 giant fangs that reminded me of snake fangs in the front. We all watched in horror as this thing that had just been shot by 6 .38 rounds and about 17 .22 rounds let out a terrifying sound, which was similar to a mix between a gator's snarl and a snake's hiss, before turning and charging into the woods. I looked at T and said, "We need to get out of here, right now." We booked it back to T's truck. As we got to the truck, the sun was beginning to set. T and M hopped into the cab, while C and I hopped in the back. We tore out of the trees and towards T's house. But before we left, I looked back towards the river. I swear to Odin that there, right inside the tree line on the other side, I saw that thing again, staring at us and bearing those terrible fangs. After we got back to T's house, we ran inside and locked the door. The sun had already set, and we wasted no time smoking to relax ourselves. Now, T's house, which was in reality a fifth wheel mobile home, was situated on the edge of a swamp. That swamp bordered his house and the woods that surrounded the river. He was paranoid and didn't want to take any chances with that thing. C told us that he had to go home to his girlfriend and son. His truck was parked just outside T's gate, so we stepped out with him and watched as he got in his truck and left. The whole time, T held onto that revolver really close, and M still had that rifle. We went back inside and began to smoke again. As the night went on, midnight came around. By then, we'd forgotten about what we'd seen. Now we were just sitting at the table, talking about random stuff. I think we were talking about the show Vikings. Suddenly, we hear it. The same creepy sound that creature had made, only this time it was coming from the swamp. That freaking thing had tracked us down. When we heard this, we all became sober pretty quick. T's dog, a pit bull named Athena, perked up her ears and went into protective mode. She stared at the door, snarling and baring her teeth. We grabbed the guns which we had kept next to us, turning off the lights and hunkering down in the small kitchen as T held tightly to Athena's collar. All our guns were aimed at the door. From outside, we heard as this thing began to make small, weird clicking sounds. We listened as the clicking circled the house and made its way up onto the roof. Eventually, it came back around to the front door. We listened as the thing began to make that hissing sound again, but this time in a lower pitch. It stayed there in front of the door, hissing and clawing at the door with its giant claws. To our horror, we watched as the moonlight showed the silhouette of one of its claws being scratched down the window on the front door. This hissing, clicking, and scratching went on all night. When we at last saw the sun trickling through the window, everything had finally stopped. We smoked again to calm ourselves down and headed to sleep. I was awakened by M shaking me at some point. "What is it?" I said to him in a groggy voice. "Dude, you need to see this." I got up and followed him outside to T. "Look at my door, bro," T said as I walked over to him. M closed the front door to the house, and that's when I saw them. Giant gashes covering the door and huge scratches all across the glass of the window. That's from the freaking thing from last night, M said, before I could finish my sentence. A few days later, I went back to T's house and noticed he had changed his front door. As I walked into the house, I noticed the old door, still covered in gashes and scratches, was leaning against the wall. I walked over and sat at the table next to T. I asked him, "Hey, you think it'll come back?" "I pray it doesn't, 'cause anything that can walk away from getting pummeled by all those rounds, it's something I don't want to mess with," he said to me as he stared at the old door. We never really mentioned it again after that. I don't know what that thing was, and I hope I never see it again. To anyone going to Crystal Springs River in Crystal Springs, Florida, be careful. There's something out there, and it can find you. Ghost Stories from Ge Sav. I have had several unexplained moments in my life. I'll share a few here. When I was 9 or 10 years old, I had my cousins come over. One was a girl my age, and one was a boy a year younger than me. I also have a sister who's 5 years younger than me, and for this story, we'll call her Sarah. My cousins and I were in my room. My younger cousin was asleep on my bed, and my sister was sleeping on the couch that's connected to the kitchen. It was late at night, 12 to 1 a.m. We were talking about something, I don't remember exactly what, until a certain sound cut us both off. It was a whisper that seemed to have come from the kitchen. It wasn't a normal whisper, though. It was loud and raspy, and it wasn't any voice that we recognized. But it wasn't that was scariest. It's what we heard it say that really terrified me. I'll never forget it. It said,
"Psst, Sarah, come here."
This voice did say more than that, but I wasn't able to catch all of it. But I did catch that. And I do remember it calling for my sister as well. That's when my cousin and I looked at each other with wide, terrified eyes, asking one another in unison, "Did you hear that?" Worried about my sister, we looked out my door to where the sound came from, but there was nothing there. I ran across the house then to my parents' room, opening the door to see they were both asleep. Then I ran back to my room, terrified, and I didn't leave that room for the remainder of the night. This second story happened when I was 13, about to be 14. It was summertime and we had recently moved. The house needed to be repaired, so we stayed in a trailer in the back. My sister was 8 at the time. While at this house, I've had gravel thrown at me. I told my parents and they said it was just acorns falling from the big oak tree that was near the trailer. I believed this explanation until one time in broad daylight, I saw a big piece of gravel hurtling towards my face. I was able to move out of the way, but the oak tree wasn't there, and the direction it came from was our open field, which was about the size of a football field. I looked around to see if it was my sister doing it, but no one was in the field. Then what happened in the house later is what made me feel really sick. You see, when we lived in the trailer, we had to go inside the house to use the bathroom. One night, my sister needed to use the bathroom, but was scared, so my parents made me go with her. I grabbed the flashlight and we went into the dark house with nothing but the moonlight and a flashlight lighting it up. Across from the bathroom was the room that was going to be my room when the house was complete. While waiting on my sister, I needed to go to the bathroom too. Once she came out, I went in, asking her to wait for me this time. I gave her the light, so she didn't hurt herself in the dark. When I was done in the bathroom, I came out, and my sister wasn't there. Annoyed, I looked around to see if she was trying to scare me. Then, in my would-be room, I see her short silhouette in front of the window that's on the back wall of my room. "Hey, I can see you, I said to her, but she didn't respond. I then say, come on. And still she didn't come towards me. She just stood there. She was only slightly moving. Because of that, I knew it wasn't just a shadow I was looking at. I then got this uneasy feeling. I shouted out to my sister, I'm gonna leave without you. Then I ran out of the house as fast as I could. When I made it back to the trailer, I waited at the door a little while to see if she'd come out, but she didn't. I opened the door to the trailer and I see my sister inside. I knew she couldn't have got there before me. I would have seen her pass me. I asked her if she was hiding in my room, and I knew what the answer would be. She said no. With many thoughts in my head, I went to bed. The following morning, I looked over to my room to see if there was a ladder or something at my window, some way for my sister to beat me back to the trailer. But there wasn't. My room was empty. A bit later, a few weeks or so, we go into the attic and see what the old house had left in it. When looking around, we found an old military suit, which was small enough to fit my sister. In my brain, I was thinking of that shadow I saw in my room, which is about the same height, and I figured those two things are connected. Demon at Old Gunn Church. My fiancé is from a little coastal town in South Carolina. One summer, we went to visit his mother and our friends for about 3 weeks. It was a fun time, with lots of sun, sand, and great memories. I'm from up north, so spending time in the south is a treat for me, and being a big history buff, having friends who knew the area was like having my own living history book. One thing that's important to know about the south is that every nook and cranny of every town is haunted. Whether by dark secrets, history, or religion, the South has it all. The one particular big draw in this area was an abandoned church known as Old Gunn. It's an old Civil War-era church with a trauma-rich history. It had been burned down twice, rebuilt once, and the preacher is said to have fallen from the bell tower to his death. Now it sits a husk of its former self, decrepit and decaying, with untended sunken graves in the back of it. Did I mention this church sits in the middle of the Carolina swamps? Anyway, it was a late summer evening and my fiancé, Silas, our friend Tara, and I were driving out to pick up our friend Lapis. Lapis lives in the boonies of Silas's hometown, and of course we had to drive to go get her in the pitch dark. Once we arrived at Lapis's house, we began to make our way back when the four of us got the idea to visit Old Gunn. It was a new moon night, and well, 3 of the 4 of us were witches, so it seemed like a fun idea at the time. Hey May, take a ride at this gas station to Exodus Road, Lapis said to me as we made our way down the country road. Exodus Road? Geez, that doesn't help with the spooky aspect. I laughed. As soon as we took the turn down Exodus Road, a wave of anxiety rippled through the car. Our boisterous laughter was changed to nervous chuckles. We began poking fun at the idea of any of this creepy lore being true. We all believed it, of course, but we wanted to pretend to be strong, just a little longer. It seemed the longer we drove into the night, the louder we all got, hoping our false sense of joy would press back out on the encroaching fear and darkness. A few more bends and winds in the road, and a rough left turn, we finally arrived at our destination. The facade of the church loomed high into the dark night sky, behind an old chain-link fence and sign posted in the nearby pine tree. The sign read, "Warning, trespassers will be prosecuted. Smile, you're on camera." "We're here," I said cheerfully, hiding the unease I felt as I peered into the illuminated front door, then to the blown-out stained glass window. The only light around were the headlights of the car and the few stars illuminating the sky. We all sat there in the car for a moment, unsure of what to do, what to expect, or how to proceed. I turned off the car, forcing us all to make a decision. Lapis and I were the first ones out of the car. We stood nearby just looking around. Did you guys see that?" Silas asked, pointing to the doorway. "I think I saw like a black mass slink from one side of the door to the other." He informed us, and we all turned to look. Then a loud grunt came from nearby and right behind us. "Nope," Lapis and I exclaimed. My heart picked up. "That's a wild boar," Lapis continued. "It's mad and it's close. Don't know about you guys, but I don't feel like getting gored tonight." I replied. "Same," said Silas. So we all climbed back into the car. I turned the car back on, put the headlights on the church, and we rolled down our windows. There was another grunt, and one shortly after that didn't seem quite right. Suddenly I get this sensation that something just isn't right, and I began to feel as if my left arm had electricity coursing through it. My heart sank into my stomach, because I knew that there's something here with us, and whatever it wasn't good. To further my fear, the night had grown unbearably still and quiet. I've always seemed to be a magnet for the paranormal. It started when I was 6 and I saw the spirit of my recently deceased grandfather in broad daylight. I think I'm sensitive to others' emotions and energies, and in the past year or so I've been harnessing this as a way to connect with my craft. So I know when a spirit or things are bad or good, by which side of my body feels it first. If the right side of my body feels it first, it's usually a benevolent entity. But if my left side feels it first, it always means whatever it is bad. Another grunt, and the rest of our party mentions that they heard the boar. By then my head is beginning to swim, and I'm too afraid to look to the left of me. I knew Lapis was already looking in that direction, but I felt as though if I looked over there, I'd see something I did not want to see. "That's not a boar. That's something pretending to be a boar," Lapis said. That's all the confirmation I needed to know my feeling was right. My arm began to feel stiff now, and my mouth went dry. Silas jokingly tried to guess what it was, but Lapis was staring intently out the window. I could see her in the rearview mirror. I waited, staring into the doorway of the church, hoping and praying that I wouldn't see whatever Lapis saw. The silence became deafening, and ringing filled my left ear. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. "We have to leave now. Don't turn left," Lapis spoke with intensity. I threw the car into reverse. A sense of urgency and panic coursed through my body at her words. "Sure thing. We're leaving right now, and I'm not turning right," I said to her to let her know I got the message. "Whatever you do, do not look back," she spoke with an authority that I knew wasn't false. I locked all the doors, rolled up the windows, and I hit the gas. Against my better judgment, I took a moment to look into the backup camera, and I wish I hadn't. In the dim light of the brake lights, I saw something I'll never forget. About 6 feet back was a large rolling mass of what seemed to be thick black smoke, with the occasional glint of red eyes. It seemed to move towards the car. Without hesitation, I slammed my foot on the gas. We threw gravel from our tires as the complete and utter sense of terror and dread filled me. We then sped off into the night. When the church was out of sight, I slowed down only a bit as the area was crawling with deer. I didn't feel like totaling my fiance's mother's car in the process of getting away from this thing. "What did you see?" Silas and Tara clamored. I didn't want to answer. My focus was on the road. "I'll tell you when we get somewhere inside without any windows. It doesn't want me to talk about it right now," Lapis said in monotone. She was trying not to frighten the group, but I could feel it. Without looking, I knew that I would have to keep my eyes forward and keep driving, otherwise it was going to get us. Looking behind me would let it in, then we'd all be doomed. The car grew silent after a while, and Silas insisted on playing music that added to the mood. Of course, my lovable idiot of a fiancé didn't see a thing, so he thought everything was fine. But it wasn't. It really wasn't. But I didn't want to alarm anyone. I could feel it though, creeping through the third row to the middle row where Lapis sat. and a chill ran down my spine. Lapis was unusually quiet, and I knew something was terribly wrong. A flash outside my window in the ditch of the shoulder drew my attention, and my blood ran cold. In the darkness, I could see skulls, hundreds of them shimmering and rolling in the dark, like they were being carried by the mass I'd seen before. Lapis would later tell me she saw this too. I felt it again, the stiffness in my left arm, now a shock running up my left leg as the skulls seemed to multiply and fill more of the darkness. I get this sense of pure anger, just unbridled malevolence, coming from these skulls.
"Get out,"
it urged with its presence.
"Get out. You do not belong here."
I wanted to tell it that we were leaving, to please leave us alone. I felt the need to speed up and put my eyes back on the road, to be ever vigilant for a renegade deer. Even my line of sight in the front of the car wasn't safe. As I drove, I saw a swirling black mist on the inside roof of the car. I felt the ice form in my veins, and I knew we had to book it out of there. It was at this point Lapis would inform me she felt 2 sets of hands on her, pulling her into the seat and keeping her from being able to speak. "Babe, slow down, the 10-mile curve is coming up," Silas warned. I slowed up just in time to take the narrowest, sharpest curve I have ever taken in my life, and of course, whatever this was, wasn't done with us. Sitting in the shoulder of the right-hand side of the road, my headlights illuminated my final straw for the night. A thin male deer with glowing blue eyes and an abnormally large mouth stood there looking into the car. It felt as if time stopped as I made eye contact with this creature, and every hair on my body stood on end.
"Get out, or I will get you,"
was the phrase that crossed my mind as I stared into its glowing blue eyes. I let out a scream and floored the accelerator so hard I almost redlined it. For the rest of the ride, I kept my foot on that accelerator, praying that it wouldn't catch us, knowing it could have gotten us if it wanted to, that nothing we did, no matter how fast we drove, it could have gotten its hands, if it had any, on us. Eventually, we crossed the river that separated the boonies from the more populated part of town, and it seemed after we crossed the water, that oppressive presence was gone. The air felt lighter, and my body didn't hurt anymore. As we pulled into the driveway, Lapis said, "Silas, when you turned around to look at me, I tried to warn you not to look behind, but I couldn't. It was like I couldn't control my own body to warn you." Later, after we all settled down, we did a major arcana tarot reading, and this is what it told us. You encountered chaos. Be thankful you are still alive. Do not return. After the message of that reading, we properly cleansed ourselves. Lapis and I made a pact. We would never go back to old Gunn. To those of you reading, I know this sounds fantastical, but I promise it's true. I swear it's true. To the demon or spirit of chaos living in the swamps of Old Gunn Church, I got your message, and I promise we will not be back. House of Horror, from Stephanie B., 1975. I had a friend since the age of 5 named Sherry. At the time of this occurrence, we were just entering our senior year of high school, and we had known each other a good long time. I'd been to Sherry's house numerous times over the years, and always had an odd feeling whenever I walked in the door. Granted, her father did give me the creeps, and her mother was flighty, to say the least, but the feeling really had nothing to do with them. It was the house. It was just off. One fall weekend, Sherry had asked me to spend the night at her house. Her parents were going away and she didn't want to be home alone. So I packed up my overnight bag and waited for her to pick me up. Her home was only a few minutes from where I lived, but on the other side of a highway on the outskirts of town. The night started off like any other teenage girl sleepover. We were gossiping, munching on snacks, listening to music, and playing with her dog, Donatello, named by her little brother after the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. Her older brother, Ray, came home from work, and we decided to settle down for the evening, turning on the television in her bedroom. After a few minutes, the television began to flip through channels randomly on its own. Sherry smacked the side of the television, hoping to cure it of its random channel flipping. What was weird, though, was that it was stopping and showing programs only of the worst kinds of things, such as death and chaos. It looked random, but it didn't seem random, if that makes any sense. As the channel flipping continued, a coy smile appeared on Sherry's face. "What's up?" I said. "Shh, I bet it's my brother screwing around with the remote," she answered, jerking her head toward her bedroom windows. You see, Sherry's father had built a workshop on the back of their house to repair TVs, radios, and VCRs, so her bedroom windows looked into the workshop, not outside. Since it was dark in the workshop, she surmised her brother could be on the other side of the window with a TV remote, making the channels change. Sherry jumped up, flinging open her bedroom door and yelling, "Ray," only to trail off suddenly. As I ducked under her arm, she was quite a bit taller than me. I could see why she stopped mid-sentence. Ray was sound asleep on the living room floor. "What the heck?" was all we could say. Giving each other an uneasy look, we settled once again onto her bedroom floor to watch TV. All of a sudden, the channels began to flip wildly. Sherry reached behind the TV to unplug it from the electrical outlet, but to our horror, the TV stayed on. With that, she picked up the television, ran through the house with it, and stuck it in her father's workshop. "Well, on that note," I said. "Yeah," she agreed. The two of us decided it was best to just call it a night. Sherry slept on the floor and I slept in her bed. Donatello, the dog, lay between us. After several minutes of neither of us saying a word, still too freaked out about the TV, we began to hear a low growl. "Dawn, what's wrong, dude?" Sherry asked her dog. Dawn whimpered in response and growled again. I looked up at the window, which was behind my head, only to see two red eyes looking in the window just as Donatello exploded into a frenzy of barking and growling. "What was that?" I screamed. "What did you see? I didn't see anything," Sherry yelled back. The commotion woke Ray from his slumber on the living room floor. He ran to Sherry's bedroom, bursting through the door. He asked what was wrong. I told him what I'd seen, and that apparently Donatello had seen it too, because that was when he started going crazy. Ray, who was at least 6'2" and 350 pounds, not a small guy by any stretch of the imagination, hung his head and very quietly said to us, "Yeah, I've seen those eyes too, looking in my bedroom window. And my bedroom window is 2 stories off the ground." I can honestly say I've never stayed the night at Sherry's again after that incident. I can only think of one more time I was in that house after that. I still tell this story to this day, as it's ingrained deep in my mind. I'll never forget the television, or those eyes peering in through the window. The following stories are from an older episode that it seems a lot of folks didn't get notified for. So since most of you haven't heard these stories, and they match today's topic, enjoy. Terrifying Creature Encounter in the Woods, from Henry L. My family and I are a big camping family. We go camping a lot during the summer. We usually camp at Van Buren State Park up in South Haven, Michigan, or sometimes at Pokagon State Park in Angola, Indiana. This time, we were camping at Van Buren. We had just got our campers set up. We had the rest of the day to do whatever we wanted until it got dark. My younger brother and I were believers in the paranormal, aliens, and Bigfoot. My dad believes in the paranormal, but not Bigfoot. Whenever we talk about it, my dad is always quick to say that Bigfoot isn't real. We decided to explore the woods on our bikes surrounding the park, which extended for about 2 to 3 miles in every direction. There was a trail that went into the woods, and my brother and I started riding on it. We were hoping to find something cool. We'd gotten about half a mile into the woods when I heard a faint knocking noise to my left, down on the base of the hill. I stopped, and so did my brother. I parked my bike and went to the edge of the hill and peered down. There I saw nothing. I shrugged it off, thinking it was a squirrel who dropped his acorn and it hit a branch on the way down. So we went deeper into the woods, this time about 1.5 miles in. I then heard the same noise. This time it was coming from my right. I parked my bike and looked down the hill that we were riding on. There, I saw this big, hairy creature. My mind immediately went to Bigfoot. I slipped, and a bunch of little rocks fell down and landed right on that creature. It ran off, but turned around about 5 seconds later, after it had begun to run. But I didn't wait around to see what that thing actually was. I hightailed it to my bike. I started to ride down the trail like I was in the Tour de France, my brother close behind me. I let him get in front of me, because if that creature were to catch up with us, I'd rather it get me, not my younger brother. Luckily, that didn't happen. We made it out of the woods safely. When we made it back to the campsite, my dad was sitting in his chair by the fire he just made. He asked us why we looked as if we'd seen a ghost. We told him the story, and when we finished, he just laughed, jokingly saying that we'd really found Bigfoot. I guess I had cut myself on my knee when I slipped, because I had a tiny cut there. I know some might say, oh, he's just making it up. But let me tell you, I know what I saw, and no one can tell me different. The last few days of the camping trip, my brother and I stayed out of those woods. When it was over, we packed up and left, but I'll never forget my experience there. Hellhound in the Suburbs, from Dream. I've got 2 dogs, a German Shepherd named Aku and a Labrador named Alistair. Alistair basically lived on the streets. One day he just came over to our house and stayed there, and it's been like that ever since. Alistair comes and goes as he pleases, so we don't know much about him, but he's a young and cute dog. Now onto the story. I was 12 years old when this happened. My dad always goes for a smoke before he goes to watch TV, so he basically always can say if Alistair is outside or not. Alistair sleeps in a doghouse in our front yard when he's around. It was a typical night. My dad went outside for his smoke, and when he came back in, he said that Alistair was out there sleeping in his little doghouse. I slept well up until like 2 a.m., when I was awakened to the sound of dogs squealing. This is normal, because there are a lot of dogs and cats running around everywhere. But just as I was about to go back to sleep, I heard some squeals as if something was in pain. This was weird, because most of the dogs on our street are passive. So I was a bit mad at this dumb dog that was causing problems at 2 in the freaking morning. I decided to go outside, and in that way I could kill 2 birds with 1 stone by saving the hurt dog and getting myself back to sleep. Groggily, I threw my jacket on and went outside. Walking out there, I glanced over at the doghouse, and there lay Alistair, snoozing away happily. Aku slept on the porch, but on cold nights we let them both in. The squealing was getting very loud, and the dogs in the street were going nuts. I went and opened the gate and looked out on the street. What I saw, I couldn't even understand. There was our neighbor's dog running for its life from something that seemed to come straight from hell. Some enormous black dog, that looked similar to a Doberman, but it was far too big to be a normal one. And if that wasn't enough, it had jet black eyes. When it ran under a lamppost, I saw absolutely no whites in its eyes. They were only black. This thing was gaining on the poor dog, but just as it was about to catch it, I made a big mistake. I shouted at it. That seemed to make it mad. Now it stopped chasing that dog and was now staring at me with those jet black eyes. Then it let out a deep growl. It sounded like a motorcycle starting. I then took off, running for my life. Take note, it was wintertime, and it had snowed overnight. Disaster struck just as I was getting into the yard. I slipped. That gave this demon enough time to pounce on me. It weighed as much as my 2 dogs combined. I thought it was over. But just as this thing was opening its mouth to bite my arm, I heard barking and 2 shots. When I looked to my right, I first saw my dogs burst out of the gate, beginning to maul this thing. Then I saw my neighbor and my dad coming out with rifles. I blacked out then. When I woke up, I was in my house with my mom, dad, and neighbor standing over me. I only suffered a cut on my chest, and after a visit to the vet, by some miracle my neighbor's dog survived, the one that had been attacked. All I assume is that was a hellhound in my neighborhood. A haunting past from D3 Move. The story I'm about to present takes place in Poland, near the capital city of Warsaw. As you all know, Poland has seen some very dark times. Looking back at what happened in the past, there's no doubt why some buildings and land that have seen German and Soviet war crimes can be haunted to this day. Let's go back in time to the years between 1939 and 1945 to a place called Kompanowski Forest. Throughout the war, and even after that, Polish partisans, teachers, and other members of Polish intelligence were executed in that forest. Now, why is that important? Because 40 years later, on one of the execution sites, a house would be built. Let's skip forward 40 years in time. My great-grandmother built herself a small wooden house among the trees. It was like a dream, birds chirping, sun shining through the trees. Well, now it's a good time to say that my great-grandmother was really sick, Parkinson's to be exact. She took some really strong medicine, and as time has shown, this will be an explanation for my dad, his sister, and my grandpa as to why my granny would see and hear strange things. Every day, every single day, my great-grandma complained to my dad and his sister that, at night, Polish partisans were running around and banging on the walls. She also said she could see them running between the trees and even their pale faces peeking through the windows. Of course, they didn't believe her. As I mentioned before, they blamed it on her medicine. It kept going like this for a couple of years, but one day my great-granny reported something new. You see, my grandma was a really stylish person. Every day she would do her makeup and dress elegantly, even though she wouldn't go out anywhere. There was a day with a new paranormal appearance. She referred to him as Mr. Black. I have to admit it was quite a funny name for a shadow figure stalking you in the mirrors, because yes, she saw him only in the mirrors around the house. Again, this was dismissed by my dad, his sister, and my grandpa. Unfortunately, my great-grandma died, convinced that everyone saw her as a weirdo. In the early 2000s, the house stood empty for a couple of years. Then my dad decided that he would move in with his first wife. But before that, he had to renovate the place. And well, he couldn't finish his renovations. During that time, he had to sleep in a camper outside the house, because every minute in that home was a true horror. He felt as if somebody touched him all the time. He felt breathing on his neck, heard whispers, screams, and gunshots. But he told me that the worst part about this house was Granny's bedroom, where stood her dressing table with an oval mirror in the middle.
That mirror. That god-dang mirror,
he always said. Every time he looked in it, he saw Mr. Black behind him, hanging from the ceiling. He never finished renovating and instead built a different house, which I'm since living in to this day. After my dad told other family members about what was going on inside that house, some of them grew a lot of interest in it. Specifically, that was my uncle, his brother, and his dad. They proceeded to perform satanic rituals, which led to escalation of paranormal activity inside the house. My dad was a witness to one of their said meetings, and this is roughly what he told me. They sat in 3 people at the table. Your uncle fully zoned out as his hands flew across the Ouija board. Your other uncle sat in the corner of the room, shaking from fear. Chandelier was swinging from right to left, tables shaking, footsteps all around them. Now to 2020. You could ask, why even bother going there? Well, I've always been keen on the paranormal, and I wanted to investigate my family's most haunted house that I know of. But I can tell you now, my foot will never, ever land inside that house ever again. It was the summer of 2020. We all know that Rona canceled a lot of our plans for holidays, and I was no exception. I was beginning to dig into the history of my family, and that's how I found out about the house after all. One day I decided to go on a trip. The place was very close for me, so it would be a short trip. Soon there I was, after hearing all those stories, standing before this creepy wooden house. When I laid eyes on it, it was dirty, windows broken, wood beginning to rot. In the back of my head, I thought that maybe all these stories weren't true, and I would have a normal afternoon, apart from an old wooden house in the middle of the forest. I stepped inside, and almost immediately I felt a heavy atmosphere. All I could hear, though, was silence. Dead silence. That was until I heard the floor creaking behind me. I turned around and laughed to myself. You freaking paranoiac. I calmed down again and went to my granny's bedroom. There it was, the old dressing table. I slowly stepped towards it, my heart beating like crazy. Then I looked into it. Furthermore, I was trying to prepare myself for what I might see. But when I looked in the mirror, there was nothing except for me in the room. I exhaled. Maybe the stories were indeed fake. But then I was distracted by the bedroom door slowly closing. I didn't feel any wind, but maybe I was just too paranoid. So I looked back into the mirror. And oh boy, I regret that decision very much. There he was, the infamous Mr. Black, hanging from the ceiling, no face, just a black figure. A figure that I felt was staring deep into my soul. I was petrified. I looked at this thing for what felt like hours. But then I ran out of that accursed house as quickly as I could. After that event, I promised myself to never go back there. That house is still rotting among the trees, and I warn anyone who stumbles upon it in the north part of the Kompanowski forest to never go inside. Dark Figures in Our House, from Trace M. This strange experience happened when I was 13. It happened to my oldest brother, David, too, and my only sister, who is older than me, Hope. The layout of our house is where the kitchen is behind the family room or living room, and the whole house is open, so there are no walls in this area. The fireplace is to the right of the family room or living room. Now, we had just had a surprise party for David's 20th birthday, so we had 2 balloons, one which had the number 2 on it, and the other which had the number 0 on it. These balloons were over at the fireplace. I was in the kitchen filling up my water cup. At one point, I looked down to see if my water was almost done filling. Then I looked back up, and I saw this figure. A tall, pitch-black figure with disturbing fingers that were at least 1 to 2 feet long. Its arms were around 4 to 5 feet long, and his body was as tall as the fireplace, which is nearly 10 feet. The reason I mentioned the birthday and the balloons was because the gold number 2 balloon was moving up and down, because this thing was pulling the string with its long fingers, almost like he was playing with a reverse yo-yo. I ran upstairs to my bedroom to pray. I got David, Charles, and Isaiah to pray with me. Just before we started, the dogs all began barking like crazy, and the door to our room was shut. So David and Hope got up to go see if someone was home. But no. When they went to check it out, they saw black figures running up the stairs. David's dog Tesla was barking as loud as possible. Sounded like an air raid siren. David and Hope ran back into the bedroom. We prayed and settled down after a while, eventually going to bed, none of us leaving the room except Hope. Hope had a room of her own, connected to the office which was connected to our room. Hope didn't have to go through the balcony, which is where they saw those black things running up the stairs. David, Hope, and my Uncle Tracy were searching the whole property with loaded guns, and us little boys locked in our room. Now on to a different occurrence. We get home one day after getting some pizza. We sat inside to eat because at the time David would not let us eat in the car. Now we were enjoying our pizza when we hear the front door open. I know it was locked because the door is slightly broken and won't shut all the way, so we have to keep it locked. We all heard it, but assumed it was probably a draft. So we get done eating and me and the other boys start heading upstairs when all of a sudden Hope and David both in unison say, "What in the world?" They both heard laughter coming from the airlock, which is where the front door is, as well as to the left of the family room or living room. So now I'm officially creeped out. On another occasion, David and Hope walked out to the garage door to turn off the lights. When they got to the door, they heard a laugh again and saw a shadow on the concrete darting under the dually, a Ford F-350 with dual tires. So they turn off the lights and lock the door. Then they go into my dad's bedroom, load the 12-gauge shotgun. David takes that gun and hands the pistol off to Hope. They call my uncle and he comes over. He lives on the west side of the property. He likes his guns and has a lot of them, so he brings one over. Me and the other little boys were locked in our room, against our own will, sort of. Or should I say, for our own good. After about 30 minutes of searching the property, they all came back, finding nothing. After praying, we went to bed. The Stalker in the Shadows, from PandaHAUS. I'm not the greatest at writing or storytelling, but I'll try my best. This happened several years ago. I think I was 17. I used to live on a large farm in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was about half an hour's drive away. Our farm was surrounded by miles of dense forests. If you were to walk into those trees, the world around you would slowly disappear, and the darkness would take over,
swallowing you whole. When I was much younger, my dad would tell me stories about local kids that had gone into the forests alone at night. He would say that the kids were never found. I think at the time he was trying to scare me into exploring the woods alone. Now, on our farm, I was in charge of all the smaller chores like feeding the animals, fixing things around the property, and a few other things I can't recall. My parents never did chores around the property on the weekdays. They were both out working in town. So during the weekdays, I was in charge of looking after the farm. Side note, this isn't important to the story, but you may be wondering about my schooling. I did school on weeknights and weekends. Anyway, one night both of my parents were working double shifts, so I had the whole house to myself for the night. I was so excited that I'd have the whole night to myself, I forgot my responsibilities to the farm. At around 10 that night, I remembered that I had to feed the horses, so I put on my heavy coat because the temperature had cooled down fast and headed out to the horses. Now, horses are very sensitive creatures. They can sense if you're near or who's near if they know you. They're also very good at reading emotion when you're worked up or calm. They'll get worked up with you or be just as calm. So I was a bit concerned when I saw them freaking out in their pen. Normally, when I'm near, even when they're freaking out, they calm down a bit, knowing that I'm there. But not tonight. They were so upset that not even food did the trick. And my horses are the biggest gluttons ever, usually. Since I couldn't get them to calm down, I decided to do a walk around the pen to see if I could find what's upsetting them. I found nothing unusual around the pen or in the barn. As I was exiting the barn and closing the big door, I turned around and I spotted it. This black creature standing in front of me. I was so scared I couldn't move. It felt as if my entire body was paralyzed. This creature was a big black nothing. It had no facial features other than two black pits where eyes should have been. It was tall and slender with two large hands with razor-sharp talons. The two of us stood there, not moving a single muscle. But then something happened. That creature spoke to me in a dark, almost non-understandable voice, but I know what it said.
Run now.
I did as instructed. I ran. I ran as hard as I could all the way back to the house. When I got back inside, I locked every door and hid in my closet with a knife in my hand. I didn't sleep that night. My parents came home later in the morning around noon, I think. It doesn't matter because when they walked in, I gave them the biggest hug I'd ever given them. I've only ever seen that thing again one more time. I was walking up the stairs to my house and I saw it at the end of the driveway when I turned back to lock my car. After a few more years at the farm, I moved far away for college, and I swore that I would never step foot on that property or town again.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.